Dominican patriotism and nationalism alone doesn't prove true loyalty to the island. La patria dominicano. Only through ancestry and genealogy can someone prove if their ancestors were on the right side of Hispaniola history. ¿Y de dónde tú eres? ¿Qué lo tuyo? What's more important in understanding the history of the island is not only referring to the differences between the West End, Haiti, Los Haitianos, and the East End, Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, but also exploring the differences between the North Coast, Cibao Valley, Cibao, Santiago, and the South Coast of the island, Santo Domingo. This is the hidden history that I will unlock on this channel. La historia de Hispaniola. A new narrative and perspective will be formed. Ya tú sabes. In order to shine light on the dynamics of skin tone, wealth, servitude, and independence. Dímelo. Oye, this is the Hispaniola History Channel. La historia de Hispaniola, presented by David Rodriguez. Peace to all. This is your brother David Rodriguez with another episode of Hispaniola History Channel. And for this episode, we will be tracing the African roots of Dominicans, giving you sources, estimates, and the surnames of those who would have been enslaved in the island of Hispaniola's early history. So the purpose of this presentation is to review the best available sources on the total number of West Africans shipped into Hispaniola as slaves and servants. What were the surnames of the early residents on the islands with alleged African roots? Also dispel the myth that the slaves in Hispaniola also had the same surnames as the Spanish nobles and landowners of old Spain. Let's get into it. Here's some additional sources. I'm not going to read through all this list here, but I'll leave this on the screen for those who are trying to do some scholarly research on the African presence in Hispaniola. So the Slave Voyages database, which is the standard for scholars and academics to analyze the transatlantic slave trade, is incomplete and misleading. It puts all the slaves coming from West Africa and no mention of any other possible source for imported labor. So as I said, not only is slavevoyages.org admitting that their list is incomplete, but they're not listing all the other possible sources of those who were enslaved and brought in as servants into the island. Here we go. The first blacks in America, Dominican Studies Institute database. It provides little information on African slaves, admits that the first people of color in Hispaniola were called Ladinos and came from Spain, not Africa. Database highlights a boom of 40,000 slaves imported without stating where they were exported from. Are paying attention to some of my previous episodes, the other slavery of Hispaniola and the episode I did on the Lucayans, we know exactly where that 40,000 boom came from. Despite the study being titled The African Presence in the Dominican Republic, it makes no mentions of the native Indians shipped in from the surrounding islands. Extensive scholarship work done by Carlos Esteban Dieve and later Fonte Felipe is the best known to date research on the topic of slaves in Hispaniola, particularly the Dominican Republic. Out of the estimated 30,000 total number of Africans shipped to Hispaniola, only 79 can be accounted for. Assumption of who were slaves is based on residents in Hispaniola who had non-traditional Spanish surnames. Names like Bran, Zappa were classified as African-born slaves. Below is a chart estimating total number of slaves imported into Spanish America. So here you got a table, estimated slave imports into Spanish America from 1774 to 1807. This is very key now because this is the years leading up to the Haitian Revolution. So they're counting between 1774 and 1807 that a total of 225,000 Africans were shipped into Spanish America. And they're breaking that down from Mexico, Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Santo Domingo. Santo Domingo getting 6,000. So 6,000 between 1774 and 1807. according to these sources here. The slave names of Hispaniola. So around from this time period between 1591 and 1821, the scholars have combined their sources to come up with a list of names of folks they can attribute to African-born slaves. As you can see on this list here, some of the names that come up, and during the time period, we got folks named Pedro Alcantara Zape, hijo de Ana Zape, nacido en 1827. So it's saying, so Zape is, or Zapi, Zape, Zapa, they're attributing to be an African-born slave. Here we got Manuel Congo, 1668, with a Lucia Zape. We have a Lucia Arara, casó con Pedro Congo. So these are, I guess, marriage records around the 1600s with folks with surnames of Congo, Arara, Angola, Domingo Bamba, in 1671, died in 1671. So these are the combination of marriage records. And then on the right, you see some of the surnames. They number the number of times the names come up. So they total these numbers up, and it comes up to the number 79. So 79 could be accounted for, and they're attributing these names, these surnames, as you can see here. And if any of you have these surnames, this is a good way of doing some genealogical work. These are records, actual records of folks on the island very early in the island's history. So if anyone out there has seen this presentation and seen your surname pop up, please use this information and to do some real genealogy work within your family. We got names like Lukimi, Fala, Congo, Mambo, Mihihi, Mondongo, Zambu, Tapi, Zapi. I didn't read the whole list, but you can see it on the list here. You can see on the screen. You can take a screenshot. These are some of the folks who the scholars of Dominican history, the scholars of the history of Hispaniola, these are the ones that are saying they are African-born slaves, or just free-born people who came directly from Africa, and they're attributing their surnames to these things. But I just want to point out something very important here. The surname Zape, which came up 3 times in the census as African, may have its roots in South America. Here I have a source, La Familia Linguistique Zaparo, 1908, volume 5, page 235 to 249. It breaks down tribes in South America. They're speaking a Zaporian language from the Amazon, and they have various tribes out there. In the census, the surname Arara was identified as an African slave, but it's interesting how the word Arabella looks and sounds like the word Arab. These were native tribes from the Amazon. So one of the Zapa tribes, and Zapa comes up as a African born resident in Hispaniola, but the surname Zapa comes from Zapa tribes that were already in the Amazon, and one of them are called Arabella, and you can plainly see the word Arab in the word Arabella. And these were some of the indigenous tribes, or tribes who were present in the Americas, being reclassified as African. Whether or not they're African, that's possible, but these folks were already here with these surnames in the Amazon. So the problem with assuming these names were from African slaves, there's a lot of problems with that assumption. The estimated number of so-called Africans shipped into Hispaniola is in sharp contrast to the actual number of African slaves that can be accounted for. Slave voyages list 9,000 slaves, while the Spanish scholars come up with 6,000 total imported into Hispaniola. Despite all the diligent scholarship work done on the transatlantic slave trade, still to this day, we can only account for 79 so-called African slaves or African-born people of color in Hispaniola. These people may not have been slaves. They might have been high society Africans. Who knows? We only have their surnames due to certain records, birth records, marriage records, things of that nature. And usually when you keep records of these things, these are folks who are, vecinos, people who are landowners. So the fact that you're grabbing their names, even though it's not traditional Spanish names, and you're just saying, okay, this is just an African slave, that's a overgeneralization that has to be corrected. Also, some of the words used as surnames could have been words originating from the Americas, since we can provide more accurate accounts of the native Indians that were enslaved and shipped into Hispaniola. Did the scholars researching the so-called African presence in Hispaniola totally ignore the Indian slavery and words that may have Arawak, Lucayan, or even Mayan origins? Also, if we are to believe that slaves were property of Spanish nobles, then why aren't there any of the slaves in Hispaniola carrying recognizable Spanish surnames? It seems like a new database must be compiled combining the enslavement of Africans, American Indians, and Europeans, in which an estimated 300,000 were shipped into the Americas. I'm talking about Europeans. We have the records of that. So we have to create a whole new database. These steps must be done in order to tell a more complete and accurate narrative on the early history of Hispaniola and America as a whole. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope this brought some clarity. So for those who are trying to research their African genealogy and African roots through the island, please keep these things in mind when you're doing this research. And I hope this piece right here can help you in that. So this is tracing the African roots of Dominicans, sources, estimates, and surnames. As you can see, some of the surnames that were attributed to some of the quote-unquote Africans may possibly have origins in the Amazon. And as previously stated, stay tuned, coming soon, no release date yet for Los Moros de Hispaniola. This is going to be an ongoing series. Stay tuned for that. And of course, The Truth Shall Set You Free, another presentation dealing with the Bible's history on the island and in the Americas. So please stay tuned for that. Very good information coming soon. And until then, this is your brother David Rodriguez with another episode of Hispaniola History Channel. Peace and good night.